Therapists of Reddit, what was your biggest, I know I'm not supposed to judge you, but holy crap moment? Some of my clients are shockingly bad at giving themselves credit. Holy crap. Like they might get a nearly straight A GPA in a brutal major while battling depression, or overcome years of phobia and get behind the wheel again, or write a literal novel, or raise a kid as a single parent with low income, or build new relationships after being burned, or cope with OCD well enough to hold down a job. And they'll talk about themselves as if everyone on earth is better than them, as if their accomplishments are worthless. And I know it's because of depression or anxiety or another condition, but I'm often stunned by how differently I see them compared to how they see themselves. Number 2, I work in mental health and have worked in acute and crisis settings for the majority of my career. The most notable event I experienced was when a young person was presented with significant ongoing suicidal ideation who was dealing with a lot of stuff. I spent a lot of time with them, mostly de-escalation and working out what the plan should be moving forward. One of their parents came in a little while later, and I had the opportunity to speak to them about where their child was and what had been going on, with their consent, of course. Midway through me trying to explain some of the psychological constructs and the ways parents could help, they said to me, "Is this going to take much longer? I have a show to go and watch." All I can say is, I never judge patients. I've never walked their path or viewed the world through their eyes. But the people around them who perpetuate the suffering of the people I work with through ignorance, malice, and selfishness, I judge them. Edit, and a shameless one, I've tried to reply to as much as I could. I've enjoyed some of what I would assume is trolling and talking about some other people's experiences, as it's giving me a chance to reflect on some of my own stuff. But I must go to bed. I'd like to ask one thing of anyone who reads this. Remember that you can help, even just by asking how someone is or wishing them well. People who you think may be struggling and even people who aren't. This year has been hard on all of us, and I appreciate all of you who have said that those in care services have difficult jobs, but we have all struggled this year. Please be as kind as you can to each other, and I hope we can all look forward to a good December and an even better New Year. Edit 2. My use of the word judge needs some clarification. I do judge in some ways. It's hard not to do with what I see, who I work with, and the situations they experience or have experienced. What I mean by not judging is that I do not allow my judgment to distort what I am seeing or how I am working, which will normally be to the benefit of the patient and those around them trying to help them achieve their goals and meet their needs. Final edit. I didn't think this post would get as big as it has, and I cannot respond to every comment individually by any means. I'm sure the post will be getting less attention moving forward, but I just wanted to clarify some things. This parent, who many people have made multiple assumptions about, was not trying to redirect, deflect, or remove themselves from the situation by stating they had a show to watch. The show being something else people have assumed was a TV show. Remember, I've made the comment above in the context of a situation that lasted around 5 to 6 hours for me, but took you a few minutes to read. With everything that's going on right now, I wanted to make this post to let people know those working in mental health have heard a lot. We don't judge you for how or what you're feeling, and we want to work with you to help you. I simply wanted to help in some way with a comment on the internet that I wrote in one go about an experience I have had. I know that the responses to this has been overwhelmingly positive, but I would also like to say I did not mean to cause any offense or upset to anyone or claim that I am some sort of unachievable goal of non-judgment. Anyway, I'm going to try and forget about this now. Number 3. During my training, I was asked how you would feel if a client were to come to you and admitted they were a pedo that was on the edge of committing a seriously horrific act. Could you see that person as another human being that needed help? Or were your personal feelings about the abhorrent behavior too strong? This factor led some people to not continue my course on to the next level, but it really illustrates the level of non-judgment needed in this field. We all have our own personal feelings, of course, but these get talked about in supervision. Number 4. When I was underage, I got caught with a drink on Bourbon Street and got a minor in possession. I was telling my therapist about it and said that the police caught me with a, quote, hand grenade in New Orleans. He didn't realize that a hand grenade was a type of drink, and it was funny to watch him try to process that his patient might have just casually told him that he had been caught with a fragmentation grenade. He took a long, big pause and said, "Where did you even find a grenade?" I realized the misunderstanding quickly and corrected him, but for a moment he definitely was thinking, holy crap, how do I deal with this? Number 5. At last, I have a similar story. So this was back when I was in my first year of engineering study, and I just thought that the material papers were awesome. I especially liked the whole steel section, and at the time, my depression and general situation wasn't amazing. So it was one of those sort of things that kept me going, you know? So of course, when my therapist asked about my passions and goals, I said, well, I like steel. And she paused and said, okay, what do you like about stealing? This poor woman thought I pulled out some surprise kleptomania late into the game. Luckily, like a good therapist, she was non-judgmental, but still obviously relieved when I corrected her. Number 6. Therapist here. To piggyback on what others have said, it is highly unlikely for me to have moments where I judge my clients. Although it does happen sometimes, but I'm able to shut down those thoughts quickly in my head and return to being present for the people I see. People are so incredibly complex that my judgment wouldn't have any meaning anyway, and it doesn't have a place in our work altogether. I will admit, though, something that does get me feeling a little salty is when I have a client's parent that attempts to sabotage the therapeutic relationship I have with their child, or pulling them out of therapy entirely when some of the things we talk about challenges some potentially unhealthy family dynamics. I don't feel anger toward the parents, mostly I feel bad for the kid. Number 7. I work with youth and adolescents who have anxiety, trauma, and/or depression. Some of the kids I worked with had some pretty severe attachment issues. Regardless of this, I never thought I'd have to seriously explain: 1. You can't just buy a straitjacket for your kid. 2. Feeding your kid ultra-spicy ramen each night instead of the meal everyone else is eating isn't specifically defined as abuse, but you have to understand the emotional abuse that this causes. And 3. Your kid isn't trying to kill you because they stand in your doorway at night crying. That's likely because they're scared of their traumatic nightmares, but feel like you will just yell at them if they wake you up. Number 8. Not a judgment. You kind of train your brain not to judge because you are seeking to understand and help. When you do those things, you can't simultaneously judge. We could use all a little more of that in our real life, I suppose. I'll share this though. I do feel concerned about this recent phenomenon of young people I worked with self-diagnosing, sharing, and identifying very closely with mental illnesses as the pendulum quickly swung from never ever share your feelings to OMG, you're depressed, all of us are too. Life's challenges can be tough and they don't need a scientific sounding label to be valid and real. You are not your diagnosis. We can find validation and support in healthier ways. Number 9. I'm a dude. I was brutally sexually assaulted multiple times between the ages of 7 and 10. My one and only attempt at trying to get help from a therapist was one of the most awful experiences of my life. I attempted to get help in my early 20s. Upon first going in, I was asked what had happened to me after explaining a basic outline of the abuse. I could already see that she was very dismissive and seemed not to really believe me. She then asked about my relationship status. At the time, I was in a long-term relationship with a woman who had 2 kids, boys. Upon finding this out, she immediately demanded the names and address of my girlfriend, names of the kids, and said she would be immediately getting in touch with social services to ensure that I wasn't abusing them. I can't put into words just how much that destroyed me mentally. That she could obviously see something in me that I couldn't see. That somehow she was certain that I was an abuser. I started to cry. She told me to pull myself together. I also can't put into words the pathological, visceral hatred I have for pedophiles and sexual abusers. Honestly, if I could get away with murdering them, I would. I would never, never, never inflict the absolute nightmare I went through on any child. I got up and left. I came very close to the edge of taking my life that day. I also immediately ended the relationship because I couldn't deal with the thought that kids might be at risk because of me. It's now 21 years later and I'm tearing up typing this. Because of that experience, I never sought therapist help again. I survived mentally, but it's not good survival. Edit. Wow. Just wow. I am absolutely blown away by the internet strangers who are sending love and care to me. I am currently alone in the dark, in tears, reading all of these replies. To answer a few questions, I'm in the UK. I heard she was fired a few years later after a patient of hers took his own life, and mentioned her therapy in the note he left. I am in a position where currently I'm in such a fragile, very heavily medicated mental state that if I saw another therapist and got the same reaction, then I know my mind would break and I'd take my own life. Every day is a struggle to find reasons to stay alive. I'm sure I have PTSD as I feel like the need to be armed with a knife constantly. Despite being a big dude, 6'4", 110 kilograms, I sleep with a knife under my pillow. I often wake up screaming. I tend to be standoffish with everyone, deliberately keeping people at a distance. I know, I'm a broken person. I've even avoided relationships with women with kids because I don't want my broken mental state to somehow affect those kids in any way. I've attempted to take my life twice, and both times I survive. I just want there to be a pill or operation where I could completely wipe out the past, even wipe me out. Wake up and just have a new me, minus the depression, anxiety, fear, PTSD, crushing hatred of myself. It would be nice to wake up one day and actually be able to see some value in myself. I'd love to be married and be a dad, but currently I'm in a state where I can't ever see or allow that to happen. I'm too scared that my mental state would screw up my wife and kids' lives. I can't allow that. Number 10. Here's my most recent one. As the pandemic worsened here in the US and more lockdowns are on the way, one of my most extroverted clients and I brainstormed ways to meet her social needs while remaining safe. The following week, she canceled her session and told me she's got positive for COVID for attending an orgy, which definitely wasn't one of our ideas. I let out the deepest, most defeated sigh after I hung up on the phone. Number 11. Clinical psychologist working primarily in forensics here. This means my clients are usually involved in legal proceedings, family court, juvenile court, criminal court, etc. My job is usually to evaluate or provide treatment. I'm not there to judge, that's the judge's job, but of course, I have my thoughts. I am usually impressed by the justifications people make for terrible behavior. The one that irks me the most is when parents manipulate their child against the other parent. I've had to do therapy for a 5-year-old who said she doesn't want to see a parent because they haven't paid child support. Excuse me? What 5-year-old knows, understands, or needs to be worried about child support? Number 12. I was once in my psychiatrist's office, a bi-monthly 15-minute med check. She asked me what was going on, more as a conversation. I told her that in my last 6 weeks, my 3 elders, aunt and 2 uncles, I was guardian/conservator for, had died, one right after the other. My wife had a heart attack. My daughter attempted to take her own life, and my mom broke her hip and had laid on her floor for a week before being found. She drank and ate from the dog's bowls. I got that call within 10 minutes of setting up the last funeral. She stopped the meeting, got on the phone with a therapist in the office next to her, and had her postpone her next meeting to speak with me. I was so screwed up, I had no idea. I think she saved my life. Number 13. Can I answer from the other side? I had something close to a mental breakdown after a painful breakup. Started seeing a therapist. It was going more or less well. At one point, I had a sort of revelation about all my BS and about my own responsibility in the whole mess. So, next session, I'm actually thrilled to share this with the therapist about how finally I see a bunch of my own problems in the way I interact with women, in which caused a relationship that wasn't really healthy from the get-go. I'm halfway through trying to explain this, and the therapist goes, "Oh, women are weird." So that was that. I never went back. Screw that guy. Number 14. I feel like a lot of the comments saying that they never judge their clients might be working in voluntary services or they've been very fortunate in their client base. Judgment isn't an inherently bad thing. It's how we know that murdering people is wrong. So, when a convicted pedo client told me, "Nothing gets me going like a pair of little girls' worn panties," you better believe I judged the hell out of him. I continued to work with him, and I treated him with compassion and respect because he's a human being worthy of both. I did my job because I'm a professional. But I can't honestly say that I didn't judge him. I judged that he should never be around children. I judged that he is not yet ready for change. I judged that his access to his own daughter should be closely supervised. That's a lot of judgments. Understanding your own inherent biases and how they influence your work is a very important part of training and practice. I've got to agree with this guy. I feel like some people might be holding back. Like, you can judge people. You can be like, you can think to yourself, man, that's messed up. But it's what you do. It's how you act. It's how you treat the person. So this guy, kudos to this guy for actually answering the question. Good job, therapist guy. Let's continue. Number 15. Patient side here. I had been seeing a therapist for a few months to help with chronic depression and self-harm with some pretty intense ideation of taking my own life. I had tried Subprax in the past, didn't like the side effects, and put it down. But I was ready to try something new to supplement therapy. Everyone within earshot was calling Wellbutrin a miracle and lifesaver, so I figured I'd give that a shot. Since my therapist couldn't prescribe drugs, I got an appointment with a psychiatrist. My first appointment, I explain what I've got going on, what I'm going to work on, and what I'm looking for in seeing him. I do a pretty good job holding myself together in public. I dress myself, I hold down jobs. At that point, I lived on my own, now living with my partner. All in all, I've got a well-polished mask. I guess it's too good, because pretty early in our session, he looked at me and said, "I don't think you're depressed." Bro, this is the first time we've met. I've been here for 20 minutes, and you're ready to reserve my diagnosis? Cool, bro. See ya. Number 16. Not a therapist, but in healthcare. Two things. A, this post is stupid. No therapist is going to divulge their patient's secrets. That's not how it works. Even suggesting this may make people have second thoughts of getting needed therapy. B, no matter how messed up you think your life is, most therapists I guarantee have seen worse and won't even bat an eye at your trouble, and will devote much of their heart and time into treating you and your mental health. I've worked with many therapists, psychiatrists, and psychs, APRNs. They are 100% all great people who have a special kind of personality and heart towards their patients. Number 17. I once had a patient whose wife shook their baby to death. He wanted help reconnecting with his wife. At the time, I was a young father of a newborn myself, and he triggered a lot of fear in me for my own child, a deep loathing of his spouse, and pity, the how pathetic kind, for the patient. I tried for 3 sessions, met his spouse, and then after that handed the case over to my supervisor, who knew about my initial reactions and tried to help me through it. Unfortunately, it ended up being more about my feelings than his, and I was new to the profession at the time. These things are expected to crop up from time to time, but I was still taken aback by my own reactions. Number 18. OP, you mentioned you're getting ready to start therapy. I know we're different, but therapy was one of the best decisions I've ever made for myself. It's good to have a natural third-party weigh in on what troubles you. And remember, you don't have to stay with a therapist if you don't want to. Therapy, like any psychological treatment, is often more about trial and error to find what works for the individual than anything else. Also, you'll get out of it what you put in, so be upfront, frank, and honest with your therapist. That will help them work with you on determining the best therapy course for you. I wish you the best of luck. Number 19. Lots of people discussing pedos as an example of the toughest stuff to not judge, despite our training. I haven't yet trusted a pedo, thankfully, at least not an identified one. I did run a men's anger management group though, and some of those men had done some terrible things to women. Most of them I found ways to like and admire for their positive aspects, but there were 2 guys in that group I just could never find unconditional positive regard for. One guy basically never spoke in group. He would give one-word answers and occasionally just discuss how unfair the system was to him. I worked really hard to open him up and find things to connect over, but he never opened up to me or the group. He left the group after he strangled his girlfriend and went to jail. She survived, thankfully. The other routinely left group early, showed up late, participated minimally, and similarly never wanted to open up honestly. He left early one group after we had discussed him staying to the end and threatened me when I told him I wasn't going to get credit for attendance, something the court required. Oddly, I eventually moved into the apartment below him, completely without his knowledge, and listened to him scream at his girlfriend and break stuff while I called the cops. I judge these men. They're terrible. Maybe they're redeemable, but redemption requires self-exploration, and they both refused to do so. It's worth noting about how differently I felt about them, more so than any others in the group. Men I found ways to help and admire and respect, even in spite of their awful behavior in the past.